I usually get the 8:15 bus to the corner coffee shop, the one with the cracked windows and that faint smell of burned sugar. Today, though, I lingered a little longer by the stop, staring at my phone like maybe it would make a decision for me. Nothing ever did. I watched the bus lumber down the street, the driver yawning behind the wheel, and I thought about how I hadn't been anywhere exciting in weeks. Just mornings like this. Routine. Quiet. Safe. She was at the counter before me, already scanning the menu as if it were a crossword she wanted to solve fast. The barista called her name, and she stepped aside with that half-smile, the one that made the corners of her mouth twitch like she was hiding something small but amusing. Her hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands falling free, and I couldn't help but notice the tiny silver ring she fiddled with while waiting. "Large black, right?" she said to the barista, and when she spoke, I realized I knew her voice, not because we talked much, but because I'd heard her here before, ordering the same thing. Always large. Always black. And now, as I stood behind her, my eyes flicked toward her hands for a second too long, noticing the way her fingers curved around the cup like it was something fragile. I cleared my throat. Hey," I said. My voice was quieter than I intended. She turned, and our eyes met for a fraction longer than necessary. Something inside me tightened. Not a shock, exactly. More like recognition. She looked at me like she remembered I existed, not in a "How are you?" way, but in a "Oh, you again" way that felt personal. "You're back," she said, and there was a pause, just long enough for me to wonder if I should say more or step aside. I did neither. I just nodded, fumbling with my wallet. The barista called my order, and I took my coffee, but instead of walking away, I lingered near the counter, pretending to read the chalkboard specials. I didn't. I watched her tilt her head slightly as she scanned the pastry case, lips pursed like she was arguing with herself about the muffin. Then she noticed me noticing her. Her gaze softened, but not without a layer of caution. "Don't fall for me," she said, almost quietly, like it was meant to be heard, but not repeated. I didn't respond. My hands closed around my cup a little too tightly. I thought about what to say, but nothing fit. Not yet. And maybe it never would. I lingered near the door as she stepped outside, the autumn wind tugging at her scarf. I could have followed her, said something ridiculous like, "Walk with me," but instead I just sipped my coffee, letting the warmth slide over my fingers, imagining the curve of her smile as she vanished around the corner. Then my phone buzzed. A text. Not from her, not yet. But it made me pause anyway. I stared at the screen like it might give me instructions. And for a brief second, I imagined it was her, telling me to meet her tomorrow, or maybe to stay away, or maybe nothing at all. I didn't know what I wanted exactly. But I knew my heart had already decided. The next time I saw her, it was mid-afternoon at the library across town, the one with the narrow aisles and that faint smell of old paper. She was crouched over the history section, pulling out books that looked heavier than she should have carried alone. "Need a hand?" I asked, trying for casual, but my voice cracked a little. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I've got it, mostly. Thanks." I grabbed the two she hadn't managed to lift, and for a few steps, we walked together, shoulders brushing. It wasn't much, but the contact made the space around me shrink. She didn't comment on the age difference. She didn't remind me she was more complicated than this. Divorced, children grown, life layered in ways I hadn't even begun to imagine. But I knew. I felt it in her pauses, in the slight hesitation when her hand touched mine to take the books. We found a corner table. She opened one of the volumes while I fiddled with my notebook, pretending I needed it for something. She glanced up and caught me watching her. "I used to come here a lot when I was younger," she said, voice low. "Before everything got complicated." I nodded, uncertain whether to ask what everything meant. I didn't. Instead, I folded my napkin, noticing the way her hair caught the light, the gentle curve of her shoulder as she leaned over her book. I imagined scenarios I knew I should stop thinking about, walking her home, holding her hand while crossing the street, her telling me things I shouldn't hear. Every thought ended with a tug at my chest, a quiet warning that I was already too invested. She closed the book suddenly, a small snap that made me jump. "I have tea at my place," she said, almost like a question. I realized she expected me to decline, but my fingers had already tightened around the strap of my bag. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. She handed me a cup of tea, and our fingers brushed. It was fleeting, barely there, but it left a trace. I held the cup with both hands, trying to focus on the warmth, but my eyes kept wandering to the small framed photo on the shelf, a child, maybe 10, smiling with her. My throat tightened. We talked quietly, trading small truths. I told her about the late nights I spent staring at ceiling cracks, wondering if life would ever feel less unfinished. She listened, not commenting at first, then nodded, just once. Her hand moved, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture so ordinary it might have gone unnoticed, except it wasn't ordinary, not for me. "I don't know why that moment stayed with me," I admitted quietly when the silence stretched. "Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me." She looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips, soft and unreadable. She reached across the table, letting her hand hover over mine for a second longer than necessary. And then she let it go. It was enough. It was late evening at the bookstore again, the one with the creaky floorboards and that lingering scent of ink. I had promised myself I'd just grab a book and leave, but there she was, crouched by the poetry section, humming softly to herself. I approached slowly, trying not to look like I was creeping. "Hey, you still read this stuff?" I asked, gesturing toward a worn copy of Neruda. She glanced at me, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Sometimes," she said, and then paused, scanning the titles like she hadn't heard me at all. A pause like that always made me doubt myself. Did she even want me here? Did she expect me to vanish? I reached out to flip the cover, fingers brushing hers. She froze for a second, then pulled back just slightly. Not much, but enough to make the space between us feel like a canyon. I wanted to lean closer, but something stopped me, the thought of what crossing that line would do, the quiet risk. Maybe we could. I started, then stopped. The words felt too big too fast. Instead, I leaned against the shelf, pretending to read a title, but my eyes kept flicking to her. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed a faint tremble in her hand. Something she wasn't saying. A friend of hers appeared suddenly, calling her name across the aisle. She straightened immediately, the spell broken. I stepped back, letting the moment slip through my fingers. She smiled politely, small and almost apologetic, then whispered, "I'll see you later," before turning toward her friend. The bookstore felt emptier when she left. I wandered the aisles alone, tracing the spines with my fingers, imagining her there again. The thought made my chest tighten. She lingered in my mind even as I told myself not to overthink. Not to feel. The next day, she called. Or maybe it was just a text, brief and measured. "Coffee tomorrow?" I stared at it, thumb hovering, feeling the old mix of excitement and fear. Could I push this further, or would I scare her off? When we met, I noticed the way she hesitated before sitting across from me, hands wrapped around her mug. She wasn't pulling away entirely, not physically, but there was a line in the space between us she didn't want me to cross. And I didn't know if it was my place to cross it. We talked quietly, the words sparse, our laughter subdued. At one point, I leaned in to point something out in my notebook. Our knees touched, barely, but enough to make me catch my breath. Her eyes flicked to mine for a heartbeat, long enough to notice, too short to act. For a moment, I imagined pressing closer, letting the next heartbeat decide, letting my lips brush hers in a confession neither of us was ready to say aloud. She tilted her head slightly toward me, and I felt it too, that hesitation, that danger of being honest. But then she shifted, drawing just enough back that it became clear, we were close, but not there yet. The air between us was charged in silence. I sipped my coffee slowly, pretending to study the foam, while inside, my chest kept humming with the memory of nearly touching her lips. That it was a Thursday evening, the kind that smells faintly of rain and exhaust, when I found her sitting on the bench near the riverwalk. The city's lights shimmered on the water, little golden trembles, and I almost didn't want to disturb her. She looked up when I approached, just a flicker of recognition, and I felt my chest tighten. She held a paper cup between her hands, tracing the rim with her thumb. I stayed a step back, waiting, trying to figure out how to cross the small space without overstepping. "You came," she said softly. Not a question, not quite a statement. "Yeah," I whispered. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. She tilted her head, eyes scanning the water, and for a moment, it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. I wanted to ask where, but the words wouldn't come. I sat beside her. Far enough to be polite, close enough to feel the warmth from her coat. Silence stretched. My fingers itched to reach out, but I stayed still, letting the world shrink around us. I saw someone today," she finally said, voice low. "A friend from my past. Someone I haven't seen in years." I nodded, not sure if I should ask, or if I wanted to know. My stomach tightened. "She smiled at me like she knew me better than anyone. And she hesitated, biting the inside of her lip. "I realized I don't want anyone else to see me that way." I swallowed, heart thumping, because I understood exactly what she meant. Not wanting to be seen, not wanting someone else to have that. But it also sounded like guilt, fear, maybe even a warning. My hand twitched in my lap. I don't know why I keep doing this," she whispered, almost to herself. "Letting someone in, when it's complicated. When it shouldn't even be like this." I wanted to say something, anything, but nothing fit. Instead, I watched her hands move in circles around the cup, thumb brushing a nick in the cardboard. I noticed the tremble in her fingers, and my own hands itched to steady them, to touch her just slightly, enough to let her know I was there. We sat like that for minutes that felt like hours, letting the city hum around us, letting the silence be the only honest thing between us. She began, then stopped. The words hung there, unfinished. She tilted her head toward me, eyes searching, maybe for permission, maybe for a sign. My breath caught. I wanted to fill in the blanks for her. To say whatever she needed to hear. To close the space between us in a way either of us could take back. But I stayed still. Instead, I asked the question that had been circling in my chest, barely audible. "Do you want me to stay?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Just let the silence stretch, just let the city lights tremble on the water, just let the question float between us like it might shatter everything if spoken aloud. I stopped seeing her for a few days. Not because I wanted to, exactly, but because I wasn't sure what to do with the knot in my chest every time I imagined her, sitting on that bench, waiting for me to speak the words I didn't have. Then she reappeared, not at the bench, not with a smile. At the corner cafe where I usually grabbed my black coffee before work. She walked past, eyes down, coffee in hand, pretending not to see me. I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. She didn't acknowledge me. I didn't move. Just the faint brush of her sleeve against the air, like a warning. I sat down at a nearby table, pretending to read, but every half-second I stole a glance, my chest twisting with the hope that she might, somehow, notice me. Later, a message arrived. Not from her. A name I'd never seen. "I need to talk. About him. About everything." My heart leapt, and then sank before I could even breathe. Who else? Why now? I replayed every small gesture, every glance, every pause. Was she pulling away because of me, or because of the past she'd never spoken aloud? The child she mentioned in passing months ago, the ex she never named, the life outside the tiny moments we carved together. All of it existed, just beyond the fragile bubble we built. I found myself waiting outside her apartment one evening, just for a second, just to see if the light in her window meant she was thinking about me. Nothing. No movement. The blinds drawn. The door locked. Days went by. I didn't call. I didn't text. I watched the little world we'd made slip sideways, fragile and precarious. My coffee got cold. My bus stop felt longer. My thoughts circled, stopped, circled again. Finally, I typed a message I couldn't send. I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I just don't know what to do. I stared at it for minutes, thumb hovering over send, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid she'd reply with something I couldn't handle. Or maybe I was afraid she'd reply at all. That night, I walked past the bench by the Riverwalk, hoping to see a familiar shadow, a cup resting between her hands. But the seat was empty. No one there. The wind stirred the leaves in the gutter. My heartbeat slowed to the rhythm of emptiness. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I wondered if she was thinking about me at all, or if she was somewhere else entirely, carrying the past I hadn't yet earned access to. I imagined her folding her hands around a cup of tea, tilting her head in thought, the way she always did, and I wanted to call out, but my voice stayed lodged in my throat. So I walked home slowly, coffee gone cold, streets empty, hands in my pockets, and the thought of her, of us, suspended somewhere between hope and silence. That I found her in her kitchen, late afternoon lights sliding across the counter. The kettle was boiling, the faint hiss filled the silence between us. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should step closer or turn and leave. She didn't look up immediately. Just held a mug in both hands, staring at the steam. I felt the weight of the days in between, unsent messages, empty benches, small imagined scenarios. All of it pressed against my chest. I didn't know if you'd come, she said finally, voice low, not accusing, just stating. I didn't know if I should, I admitted, stepping a few paces closer. My hands were shoved deep in my pockets. But I couldn't stay away. She set the mug down, fingertips brushing the rim. The faint tremble in her hands made me pause. She was older, yes, wiser, more complicated than I could ever claim to understand, and yet, here she was, standing quietly, letting me be present. I began and stopped, because the words were heavier than air. I didn't need to say, I like you, or anything like that. That would have been poetic forced. I just needed her to know I was here, choosing this moment. She tilted her head slightly, eyes soft but careful. I don't know if this, us, is a good idea, she admitted, voice barely above the kettle's hiss. A confession not loud, but raw. I nodded, feeling every pulse of her hesitation. I know, I said. I know it's messy. I know it's complicated. My chest tightened. But I want to be here anyway. The silence stretched, filled only by the kettle's faint whine, the hum of the fridge, our steady breathing. The choice had been made, not with grand gestures, but with quiet courage. I stayed. She didn't push me away. She reached for her mug again, slowly, and I noticed the small, intimate cost of the moment. Every movement carried restraint, fear of misstep, of saying too much. She could have walked out, closed the door, and left me with the echo of a possibility. But she didn't. Instead, she glanced up, eyes meeting mine. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just acknowledgement. Permission. Connection. I took a small step closer, careful. She didn't flinch. I reached out, lightly brushing the back of her hand with mine. That was enough. Okay, she said softly, almost to herself, almost like she needed to test the word in her mouth. Okay, I echoed, not needing to elaborate. Not needing promises. Not needing more than the quiet certainty that, for now, we were here, together, choosing each other in the ordinary. We stood there a few more minutes, letting the kettle finish, letting the small, human intimacy settle in. No fireworks, no sweeping declarations. Just presence. And maybe that was enough. Weeks passed, and the city kept moving, indifferent. I found myself back at the corner coffee shop one morning, the clock reading 8:47 a.m., same as always. She was there, already seated with her large black coffee, eyes on her notebook, the faint curl of a smile when she realized I'd arrived. I slid into the seat across from her, careful not to disturb the calm. We didn't need grand gestures. The space between us had already been bridged in small, deliberate ways: a shared cup of tea in her kitchen, a laugh that lingered longer than expected, the occasional brush of fingers as if by accident. "Morning," she said, voice soft but steady. "Morning," I replied. My mug steamed in my hands. I took a careful sip, noticing the warmth, the faint bitterness I liked, and the comfort of familiarity. We didn't talk about the past weeks, the near confessions, the pauses, or the messages unsent. They were part of the quiet scaffolding that held us together now. I realized we didn't need to revisit the tension, it had served its purpose. We just needed to exist in the ordinary, together. Later, we walked along the river walk, the same bench waiting for us, worn and crooked but familiar. She sat first, curling her scarf a little tighter. I joined her, placing my bag beside me, hands brushing briefly before settling in my lap. The city hummed around us, but our corner was calm, ours alone. She pulled her cup of tea closer, inhaling the steam, and I noticed her fingers tracing the rim, a tiny gesture I'd memorized months ago. I let myself watch, letting the silence speak what words couldn't. We shared small stories of our mornings, the people we passed, a joke overheard on the street. No dramatic declarations, just presence. Her smile lingered in ways that didn't need explanation. I sipped my black coffee, cold now, and thought about how these routines, these small, mundane acts, were enough to hold something that felt like home. Sometimes she tilted her head toward me when she laughed, and I caught the unspoken, a shared understanding of everything we'd survived to be here, quietly, without fanfare. I remembered the message I never sent, the empty bench, the pauses that once felt unbearable. Now they felt like markers, proof of patience, evidence of a slow, careful kind of love. She glanced at me briefly, eyes catching the light, and whispered, almost to herself, "You always notice." I smiled because I did. I always did. And she understood, without needing more. That was enough. I leaned back, letting the morning hum, the coffee warmth, the quiet companionship settle around us. Life wasn't perfect, never would be. But it was steady. And for now, steady was more than enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?